Welcome back from lunch, everybody. We are starting off this afternoon with a Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance update. We're going to be hearing first from Donna Schaffner, who will be doing a general update, and then Martin Bucknavage will do a curriculum update. After both updates, we're going to have a joint Q&A, which will be hosted by Christina Wormald, who you have heard from hosting the last Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentations, feel free to drop them in the chat. I know Donna in particular is happy to address things in chat as we go along. Donna Schaffner is the Associate Director of Food Safety, Quality Assurance, and Training at Rutgers University's Food Innovation Center. Martin Bucknavage is a Senior Food Safety Extension Associate at Penn State. And Donna, I'll let you share your slides now if you'd like to.
So I'm taking this approach from after 6 years of actually teaching the preventive controls for human food course. And now let's see if I can make it move. That would help. There we go. So at the Rutgers Food Innovation Center, we've taught a lot of classes, and a lot of people have earned their preventive controls qualified individual certificates. And the first couple of years, it was mostly the PCHF classes with a real reduced demand for HACCP, because I think that was the focus. That was where people put their training money. But then it became a mix. And for Rutgers, the last couple of years, I've been teaching more HACCP classes than preventive controls. I think the demand for the preventive controls has largely been met by the companies who are proactive in going out there to do the training. But the third-party audits are still requiring a recent HACCP certificate for people in charge of food safety, even if they're FDA-regulated facilities. So that's why I'm seeing a lot of requests for the HACCP classes. And I'll go the right direction here. So some of the metrics coming out of the Fspca. I don't know how well you can read it up here, but this is just showing the certificates that have been issued to date for human food. And these statistics are things, if you want to look at these, ifpti.com, you can go to the statistics and see all of these, the metrics. But, and also, I think these slides will be available after the presentation if you want to look at the ones that I'm putting up here. Human food blended courses, so there's not as many. You've seen a lot more of these courses happening the last 2 years just because the restrictions on travel and the availability of the in-person classes. You can see here the trending for the human food total PCQI certificates, still trending downward. This is just in the U.S. And you see we had a big dip here in 2020, kind of came up again. So I think that line is leveling out a little bit, just because I think training overall, we were running less classes when the pandemic first became a problem, but now people are coming back because they need those classes. This graphic just shows you the PCQI certificates issued by country. So you can see that in the US, we are far and beyond what's been given in the other countries. Partly because we have 10 times the number of instructors. So lead instructors, we've got 1,267 currently registered here in the U.S. China and India, 130 and 107 compared to the population of people needing these classes. So I think that's why our certificates are so much higher. Now, Martin's going to talk to you in a few minutes, talking about the update to the preventive controls for human food course. We're at a point where we're about 10 years out from the time we created these courses. So as with any sort of thing, as time goes on, there were a lot of things that were proposed in the regulation that were put out there, and then the expectations of the regulators versus the expectations of the people in the industry were somewhat different. So we've had a few years now to see how that's actually going to work, and for the instructors to use the classes, and where the people who originally put the classes together maybe doesn't meet the expectations of some of the people out there training them. So Martin's headed up a group to do some updates for the preventive controls for human food, but the other courses are still out there that are going to need the same sort of updates. So one of the big questions is who and how are going to pay for these. Now, the rest of this slide maybe is supposed you should be able to give a laugh, right? There's $1 billion out there to expand independent processing capacity. Who thinks that we'll actually see any of that come to us as training dollars? I don't see anybody raising their hand there. So anybody want to guess who's going to pay for this? So we will, right? So one of the things that you saw this year, if you're a currently registered lead instructor, you should have gotten the emails that the books, the exercise guides, all of the prices went up approximately $10 per book. And this was that last slide was the human food, FSBP, IAVA, and then human food. So the books, the model plans, everything, if you're buying them through the FSPCA bookstore, the prices all went up. Now, one of the things that I've been talking to Gerald about, the prices are the same whether you buy them through the FSPCA bookstore or if you buy them through Amazon. But the huge difference is that if you're buying these through Amazon, if you have an Amazon Prime account where you get free shipping, I don't know about the rest of you, but we've been paying as much for shipping as we did for the books. And then after we were going virtual, Rutgers required us to be completely virtual the last year and a half. We were not allowed to go out to teaching these courses, but that meant that the way we had been doing things was we bought the books, had them shipped to us, and then we would ship them out to the participants once we started doing these virtual classes. That is so inefficient, and we end up paying more shipping than we do for the materials, and it's just ridiculous. So one option that you may want to look at this point is going through Amazon for your materials, and that cuts down the shipping. And also, if you were looking at doing the human food for Spanish-speaking audiences, the Spanish materials were only available through Amazon. Now, one of the things that probably all of you are doing, I know we are at Rutgers, is how can we save on cost? So the biggest difference we're making is using that Amazon Prime to order the books. Now, it was suggested to me, some people, because I was questioning how some people were offering classes at a low price. What seemed to me like a lower price, but I was told that they were not purchasing the books, and they're even sending a link just to online, which we tried at Rutgers, and it doesn't work well, especially for people who are not young university age people. If they're not really good with a computer, it's very difficult to ask them to switch between screens. If you want them to look at something in the book or flip to a page in the workbook and move away from the main screen that they see you on, for some people that is very difficult and they get very confused. So we've tried a couple of ways. We tried just sending the link to the book and actually shipping them printed copies for the workbooks, worksheets. That worked a little better. I've been told that some of the instructors, what they're doing now is they're just saying that the fee for the class does not include the books, And instead, they're giving them the link to the Amazon and saying, you purchase your own book from Amazon. Amazon has the deal with IFPTI that they will print them local to save on shipping cost. So that even if you were paying the shipping on Amazon, it should be less because they would be getting printed somewhere closer to you than, all the way across the country. But I think the concern we're having is, are they actually going to purchase a book? One of the issues that I've been having, I don't know about the rest of you, is people don't want to sign up ahead of time. People are waiting until the last week to sign up for a class. Well, if they wait so long to sign up for the class, we don't have time to ship them the book. Shipping has become a lot less dependable. They're not having time to order a book from Amazon and have it printed and shipped. So then you're still running into that. They're trying to navigate the class without a book, which personally, I think is very difficult to teach the class virtually, try to hold people's attention when they're sitting there. You just see a little, you see a little square on the screen, and you're trying to hold their attention while they're at home with their kids and their pets. And then you're trying to explain to them how to go to a different screen on their computer and then how to get back to the main screen. I work with WebEx, so we do the group breakouts on the computer. But if someone is having a connectivity issue and they get dropped during a group breakout and they come back in, you can't add them back to the breakout without restarting the breakout for everybody. If they don't have a good connection or they're only on their phone, then you can't put them in a breakout. They can only work with the people on the main screen. So there's a lot of challenges with trying to do this, not in person and not with the books in front of them. So those are some of the things that my group's been working with on how to better deal with all of this. And there we go. As far as other things, a little bit bigger with the association. So Bob Brackett's no longer with iFish. He's now a private consultant. Jason Wan is the interim director, which makes him the interim director for the FSPCA advisory board. I just spoke to Gerald Wishtala during the lunch break. They still aren't any closer to hiring a new director for iFish, and the direction that they want to go with this is that person, even when hired, will not directly be the person who will oversee the FSPCA, but that person will hire someone else to have a separate job that's going to be the director for overseeing the FSPCA. So at best, we're looking at 3 or 4 months and probably longer before we actually know who is going to be overseeing the FSPCA. And then we have to look at some things like that. There's a typo there. After the preventive controls for human food updates are completed, there will have to be some online refresher course for people to retain that lead instructor status. At this point, they're saying it's going to be online and at minimal cost. Probably not something we're going to have to worry about this year, though. I know Martin will give us more details, but even at best estimates of when they're going to roll out the new curriculum, by the time everything is implemented, it's probably going to be 2023 before you're going to be looking at taking refresher courses. Because of the COVID variants and the problems a lot of places are having, a lot of the state and local governments are not allowing the in-person classes. So the temporary approvals that FSPCA was giving for the live virtual trainings is continued. They don't have a cutoff date, really. Plans for this year would be that there are going to be more language translations, because we have English and Spanish, but there's a number of other languages that they want to get this translated into as far as official versions. and updates to other curriculums. So that's something that will continue through this year. The audits of lead instructors by the FSPCA will continue, mostly based on student evaluations. So if they get complaints about specific instructors, then they will probably have someone to sit in and audit classes. But that's supposed to be being done on a somewhat random basis. I don't know how many of you have taught the intentional adulteration one, so I've had that one audited a couple of times because they were not wanting that to be a virtual class, but when that was our only choice, I had it audited to run it a couple of times because we ran it for the Food Safety Summit. One of the big things that FDA is looking at is this new era, tech-enabled traceability, enhanced food safety. So one of the things that we've been seeing with a lot of my clients is that it's not just the GFSI audits now assessing food safety culture, but we're actually having FDA inspectors writing up comments about food safety culture within the processing plant. Are the management actually promoting the food safety culture? Is it top down that people understand the expectations? And I think we heard some of that in this morning's session with Monica. With some, we still have some facilities that think having a consultant write them a plan is all they need. They don't really need to understand it or follow it. But this is where the FDA says that they want to see that the training is carried out. Everybody understands what it's supposed to be. So the GFSI audits are coming closer to the FSMA rules. I know that SQF version 9 has incorporated some of the things that we put in with preventive controls, but they are still requiring HACCP and HACCP training for the people in charge of the food safety plan. So that's something where I'm getting a lot more call for people to say, okay, how do I have a HACCP plan and CCPs and have a food safety plan with preventive controls? And, you know, to me, it's not all that difficult. You're calling them CCPs, but then you've got a lot more additional things with that preventive controls plan. So most of the audits that I'm hearing about, they're accepting if you call it a CCP versus a process preventive control, as long as you're including everything in there. The allergen cross contact is a big concern that is being looked at in these audits. Are companies actually following what they wrote into their plan? So the implementation of the written plan is another big thing. So with the training for this next year, I don't know. Do any of you out there think that you're going to go back to teaching in-person classes? Is that something besides Martin? I guess Martin, you said you haven't not done that. Okay, so a lot of us didn't have that choice, but you said at Penn State you've been doing that?
That is correct.
Yeah. Lori, were any of yours in person?
For seafood, actually, meat and poultry we did on virtual. That was a 3-day class. That was a little more difficult. The seafood class, we did the segment 1 online and segment 2, sort of like the blended stuff you have, the PCHF blended stuff. And I've done, so seafood, meat and poultry. I know other people are doing produce online or virtual. And and of course I worked with Nicole, who leads stuff to do the blended class online. So the answer is, I guess not for the last year or so. But I do want to just make a quick comment. we do not order the books for seafood, and I think you have a good idea about how big that guidance document is, and that we use it quite a bit in our virtual class. They have to buy it. They're not allowed in if they don't. Every once in a while, of course, we have people who check the rules. But the thing is we break into groups, and if they can't be part of the group and contribute and all that, then we don't give them a certificate. Part of it is going into the guide and doing that stuff. So it's worked fairly well. There's always bumps, but it's worked fairly well. We have them get their own guide, and we tell them they have to have it, and they have to show it before.
Okay, I was just going to ask, how do you have them prove that? They have to show it to you on the screen?
They have to show it to us, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because with us, I think it's more that we have people who are registering at the last minute, and we have registration deadlines. Like we cut off our we cut off about a week or so beforehand. It's off, so they have to call us specifically, and then we ask them all these questions, and if they have everything, then we have capacity, because we only do 20 in a class with four instructors, but basically we have a registration deadline, and that's how it works. So it's worked pretty well. Like I said, there's always bumps in the road. Somebody doesn't do what they're doing, but you're absolutely right. Most people have one screen, and I can barely do it myself. I'm never going to be able to explain to somebody how to go back and forth between their guidance document and what we're working on. And of course, it doesn't go as fast when you're doing it through a PDF version. So anyway, so it works much better. So we've had good luck, but we have specific things that we do. Okay. What about Nicole or Amanda? Are y'all doing in person?
Preventive controls we have not done in person, but with the offering the 1 day online, it's people have been contacting me last minute. I canceled the last class, and then I think I might have had enough people, and I'm like, but they wait until like the day before or 2 days before, and it's like I already made a decision, and schedules have changed that quick, so it's been frustrating.
Right. That's where we're having, if we really stick to that 2 week ahead of time cutoff, we don't have enough people to run the class. But then during that week before the class is when we'll get 5 or 6 people show up. So it's really tough. What about you, Nicole?
An in-person session in September, but it was just the blended course, and it was fun because it had the human interaction, but you had your masks on, and I needed a room that was twice as we opted to have a bigger room. There was only 7 people. I debated about even doing it because it's so much work. Right. But I had people that were I saw the people were flying in, and I can't change it. I mean, you could, but how do you create a condition that caters to flight cancellations and all those? We just went for it, and it was great. The people that did go really appreciated it, and hosting a group with 7 people is way easier. But we found when we host the virtual sessions, I always feel like Harry Potter Dementors come and suck my soul out of me by the time we're done, because everyone's on mute and people don't like to talk, and it's awkward like a weird junior high dance. So you were over enthusiastic to try to give avoid fatigue. Maybe it's just me, but I find them very exhausting. I think people appreciate it, but we end up increasing our personnel to make sure that all participants feel heard. Tutorials ahead of time, because like you were saying before, not everyone's computer savvy, so using Google chat rooms or work sessions takes a little co-op time. So I have team members to help facilitate that, so that everyone's voice feels that they all think that they're being connected with our team.
Well, I never ever do it by myself. I always have another person, and while one of us is giving the lecture, the other person is answering in the chat or helping the people who got dropped get back in. So we've always got one doing the technical side while the other one's talking to the group, because Right. We have to do it. We have to figure out a way to make it work. And it's gotten easier, but it's still, I think my biggest problem is that the people who don't have good connectivity and get dropped, or they can't hear us, or the screen locks up. I ask them a question and they start to say something, and then there's just the little blue circle. So it's challenging. I think in New Jersey, Rutgers is pretty conservative about the COVID things, and they may not be letting students come back this semester. They still haven't made a definite decision about it. So it's everything. Everybody has to be prepared to do everything virtual. So we don't know. So it may just continue for us in virtual. But a question for someone though, did you lower your prices when you went to virtual classes?
Yes.
A little bit. So are you going to go back up if you go back to in-person classes?
Yes, I'll have to.
Because one of the things we're looking at, food cost, people to help. Oh my goodness, in South Jersey, getting people to work is a real issue. So getting people to come in and help. If you want to cater, we bring in meals and set up cleanup or whatever. We have nobody to help with that because we don't have any ability to hire people part-time through the university right now. So yeah, I think there are a lot of headwinds out there. Right. That's what we're supposed to call them, opportunities and headwinds. So good luck to everybody with your trainings this coming year. And I hope I'll talk to you again later. So I'll turn it over to Martin at this point.
All right. Well, thank you, Donna, and thank you to the center for allowing me to come in here today and talk about the curriculum update. So we'll talk about that. I will apologize in advance if you had sat through the annual conference this year. Much of this is going to be from that conference. So I did make a few modifications because we have updated some of the information that's on there. But we're going to go through that and just talk about some of the stuff. And at the end, we'll talk about some of the challenges that we have as far as the group goes. As far as Penn State goes, we've been doing, my colleague down there, Rick Kroll, and I have been crossing the country, crossing the state. I mean, we've been doing our in-class trainings still. And, we try to provide that alternative because I know a lot of times people are looking for that. Certainly there's a lot of you out there doing the online version or the virtual version. And, for us, we're, doing the in-class, and we've done pretty well. We've had trainings last year. We've got trainings coming up this year. And as I was telling Donna earlier, we've restricted our seating capacity somewhat, just so that people aren't sitting on top of each other. But again, we've been able to basically fill the classes to the capacities that we had so far. So, if you are looking for somebody that really wants to have an online training and they don't mind traveling, you could certainly, send them down and they could come in our training. So anyway, let's move on to into this, into the curriculum here. And, one of the things, Donna was just talking about was the fact that, we are doing HACCP training, and we ourselves are doing a lot of HACCP training here at Penn State as well. We've just, as Donna had mentioned, there are, we still do the preventive controls, but we're also doing HACCP because a lot of these audit requirements have HACCP in there. And so one of the things that we want to do within the curriculum is really address that aspect of it, which is come back and allow the third party, the GFSI providers, SQF, BRC, to approve this training as part of a HACCP training. And we had a meeting with them. It was a very good meeting. And a lot of the things that they've identified, we've gone through and we've made those adjustments into the curriculum. We have a couple little hurdles left to go. We're going to meet back with them when we're a little bit further along this process. But from my perspective, and having done HACCP training for Next Ever, as well as the preventive control training, it's a HACCP-based training, and it should count for that. And just making some changes to the curriculum. And really a lot of it is just readjusting it, moving things into certain sections to allow us to have the 7 principles covered as part of the process control component it really should get it done. So, so we're going to address that. We're also in the update, we're making sure that we address the regulatory guidance updates. The FDA has released and continues to release guidance updates. And so we're making sure that those are adapted into the curriculum. Another thing that's really big is the fact that, all of us that have done this training, since the start, we've learned a lot. And one of the things that we're incorporating back into the new update, and that's why this update is kind of a major update, is we've learned a lot of stuff. Being involved early on, there was a lot of things that were just sort of put into the curriculum, and it was like, all right, it's there, it's in the regulation. But now that we've had a chance to work with it and look at it, just as an example of that, the one thing are exception records, right? You got that one slide on exception records, and so we've had a lot of discussion on that with the group. And, within our group, we have, of course, Jenny Scott is involved. We have Deb Diviner is involved, and so they have their viewpoint of how they want it. And then there's a lot of us that are coming from a practitioner standpoint. And so we have that discussions, and hopefully we're going to address a lot of these things, that when you're going through the curriculum, like, oh, that's kind of a little bland or doesn't have much there. So hopefully we're going to add that in there to help some of these key concepts. And our real goal here is to help the mid and small size companies, and so we're trying to incorporate a lot of examples in there. And I'll talk about some of the challenges that go along with that. And again, by rearranging the curriculum, our hope, and we had a really good meeting, so I'm really kind of thinking that we're going to be fine, is getting acceptance from the GFSI providers for their acceptance on that. So what we're working on now is working really on the PowerPoints and allowing the PowerPoints to really generate the outline of the curriculum. And as we're doing this, we're working on the workbook as well. Currently, what we're planning to do is we're going to have a participant workbook. And as you know now, with an instructor workbook, there's a participant workbook that's been had some stuff added in there, and that becomes the instructor's workbook. And one of the things that we find that makes it difficult for doing that is, as regulatory updates come in, we don't want to be going back and redoing the participant workbook, because that's the one that's going to be FDA approved. And so what we're going to have is probably a separate instructor book that could be more easily updated without having to go through a lot of the regulatory acceptance. And so what we're going to do is we're trying to jam full that instructor's book with all the all the examples or things that you can ask or do within the classroom to make that a richer curriculum. And a lot of that's being driven by Kathy Gombas and her group that does the lead instructor training. Because when you've gone through lead instructor training, they provide a lot of information to you that's really interesting, really great. And, it's really hard sometimes to get it in that participant manual. So we're going to have a separate teaching manual. Well, it's our plan, at least, to have a separate teaching manual that could be easily updated, so that when you're doing training, we can issue those books out at a lower cost to you, and you have a chance to go through that, look at the updates, and keep you updated so that you can keep your classes updated. So that's kind of the goal right now, right? Going through the PowerPoints, getting those updated, figuring out where we're going to add material in for the instructor's guide, and developing that course book as we go along. So at this point, we've gone through, at this point, we're working through the curriculum. Man, it's taken a lot longer than we had thought it was going to take. And a lot of it is just because of timing, trying to get a bunch of people together to have a meeting. And the other thing is just a lot of discussion that goes on. And, really, as Rick, it's like watching paint dry sometimes when you sit down and you're trying to argue what the definition of some word is, So it's kind of crazy sometimes. We have a lot of folks that are members, and I think the important part here is we do have the FDA reviewers that are actively involved, with this, with this group. It's a good group, and again, trying to get all these folks involved is sometimes the hardest part about it. So going through, just skip through that. So what are some of the main differences? And again, if you've sat through the the annual update or the annual meeting, this is pretty much similar. So what we did is we kind of combined chapter 1 and 2 into chapter 1 now. The chapter 1 was sort of like there was a lot of stuff that was more course related. That was moved into the preface part of the book, so it's all the stuff that relates to offering the class, and then when we get into chapter 1, it just gets into the meat of it. One of the other things that we did in this chapter is we had a really good, strong tie-in between preventive controls and HACCP. And again, a lot of that was to appease some of the third-party audits. But another big thing of it is if you are working with international groups who are using Codex, one of the big complaints has been, how does this relate to HACCP? Because a lot of these people that are working internationally, or dual jurisdiction facilities that are working both USDA and FDA, FDA try to get around that by just saying, okay, well, this is the rule, it's the rule, but there has to be some kind of connection for these companies that are still using some kind of HACCP. And so we try to lay that out or delineate that a little bit more in that first chapter. Chapter 2, good manufacturing practices. One of the things that we did there is we really kind of separated. We still go through all the GMPs, and actually we actually list almost all of the GMPs kind of summarized, because some people like to go through those, especially with international groups or with very small companies who have never really had to worry about or think about GMPs. And what we are allowing the instructor to do then is, as they're going through that, really focus in on that, those couple items, those couple bullet points from the slide that maybe makes a lot of sense for them to cover. Maybe they want to cover it in more detail. In the end, all of it will be there, and it'll allow the instructor some leadway in terms of how much they want to get into that or they don't get into that. Then what we added on to that after that is, not just covering the GMPs, but then covering it from a policy procedure standpoint from a company. So what would a company have? Well, a company will have personal hygiene program that basically reflects on the GMPs. And so then we cover that as well, so that when a company sits through it and they look at all the GMPs and okay, like, well, that's great. Well, how do I use that? Then we go through and we'll talk about the, personal hygiene practices. We'll talk about, facility, facility, design and or sanitary design and things like that. And we'll kind of get into the policies and procedures then. And then, again, when the instructor goes through it, they could spend a little bit less time on GMPs and just more or less covered, within the policies and procedures that a company would use. But again, it kind of provides a leadway from the GMPs into what a company would actually do. And I think it's going to be a lot stronger, for that. Biological hazards. One of the things that we did there is we added in a number. We only covered one pathogen within the chapter, that was salmonella. And, against a lot of people's, arguments and discussion, we got it increased to 5. And so for us food microbiologists, it's like, we can talk a little bit more about, some of the bacterial pathogens, covering some of the main ones, right? E. coli, Listeria, Clostridium botulinum, and Staphylococcus aureus, because again, those are ones, and it really kind of provides you a broader perspective of those biological hazards from that, from that perspective. The other big section here, we took out, there was a resource chapter. It was a small chapter. And what we did is we moved that into the hazard analysis section. And then we split the hazard analysis section to pull out the preventive controls, the introduction to the preventive controls from that. So in the hazard analysis chapter, you'll start to talk about the resources that you need for developing your plan. What's going to be needed when you're going through and doing your hazard analysis in terms of information. So that's going to be covered within that section. So we're not really having any redundancy from that resources chapter into the hazard analysis chapter. And then, not to make that chapter really huge, we split that preventive controls part of that out. So when you're going through and doing your hazard analysis, when you come to decide what kind of preventive controls you're going to have, now we're going to have a chapter that kind of introduces all of those. Then from there, we break down and we go into the process preventive controls, which would be our CCPs. And in here now, we'll cover the 7 principles of HACCP as part of that. And so we're hoping, again, as we're trying to get GFSI approval for this as part of a HACCP-based training, we're going to have, those 7 principles are going to be covered. We talk about how that is HACCP-based, talking about the 7 principles of HACCP, and then we go into each of those components. And the nice thing here is the fact that now we're going to cover verification and record keeping right in there with that. Before that was split out, right? You'd have to go through and wait till you got all the way to the verification and then record keeping chapter later on to come back and talk about that. So for process preventive controls, we're going to start off from, with the critical limits, work it all the way through to record keeping. And then when we go through and talk about preventive control for allergen or sanitation, we've already talked about verification. We've already talked about that you don't have to validate, those things. So you don't have to go back and re-talk about that again. You can just go through and talk about, say for supply chain preventive controls, you could talk about, monitoring, verification, record keeping all at the same time. And then we'll have a chapter at the end here that is food safety plan management. And again, this kind of comes back to HACCP training. For those that do HACCP training, they have a chapter on HACCP plan management. So we'll have that. And in that section, then we'll talk about long-term verification and as well as training needs, in that section. Again, kind of meeting that criteria for, HACCP as required by GFSI. So that's kind of the main things. And I think I've got a slide here. I guess I went through all this. So here's a slide of just an example of something that we did to try to make this a little bit more accessible for folks. And so in our current version, on the right here, we have, how the hazard analysis goes into preventive controls. And on the left here is kind of what is the version that we're going to have in the book, which kind of takes a look at it. And not that it's a huge deal, but at least you can talk about now about a given process and where those different components would apply. And we're hoping that, like these types of simple changes that we've made within the curriculum are going to help when you're talking to smaller or mid-sized companies to make it a little bit more accessible to them. Trying to think if there's anything else that I missed in here and went through. One of the things with heavy metals, we're going to have a larger section on heavy metals because of all of the controversy in and around heavy metals, especially in and around baby foods and things like that. Another big chapter that has a lot of attention will be the supply chain chapter. That chapter was written early on, when they wrote the thing, and now that we have a lot more information on that and we've done the training, it's a crappy chapter, when you go through and it's not really laid out very well. And so, we have, I don't think that it's not going to change anything, but I think it's going to, the slides that we're going to have are going to be a lot more easy to explain the supply chain components of it. Some additional things, some of my take from this, some of the challenges and opportunities that we have. Certainly one of the challenges that we have as we're doing this is we have the regulatory component versus, we'll say, a company viewpoint. And so we've been trying to match that, going through and when we're talking about the GMPs. But one of the things that we come up against is the fact that, a lot of times FDA is saying, listen, we don't want anything more in there than what's in the regulation. And this is sometimes of a challenge. Now, I think for us as extension educators, I think this, one of the things that we can do is we can still bring that to the table. We're going to include that within the instructor handbook, but getting some of that information, like a lot of the, the best practices, more or less to speak, into the curriculum or into the slides is a little hard. So we're going to have some of that in the book. And I think as extension educators, that's one of the things that we bring to the table. We understand those best practices, and in our classes we bring that. So I'm for us, I could say, I'm probably not worried about us as much as it would be for somebody who's coming and is new to, this HACCP based training, or, somebody doesn't have quite the experience that we do. Again, another thing is the addition of examples. We've wanted to add a lot of examples, but what we ended up doing is using a lot of the examples that were already in the training models. So we just kind of took those, simplified them a little bit, and used those as the examples. A couple things that it did is it allowed us not to have to worry about vetting the examples that we used in the book, because those have already been vetted. And then hopefully what we're going to have is, as time goes on, we'll have additional models, so that, because you'll be covering some of that stuff as examples within the curriculum. Another thing, as I mentioned, I think that's really a great benefit from this is really sitting down and going through and further defining some of the different concepts that were in there. One of the ones that I mentioned already was exception records. And we had a lot of a lot of discussion in and around that. And so hopefully, now when we write the book, or we have the book, it's going to be clearly laid out what exception records, means. Another thing, like we're talking about verification and monitoring, and, when is something verification, when is it monitoring? And, we really had a lot of discussion on that. And I think at the end of the day, from FDA's perspective, it doesn't really matter whether you call something monitoring or verification, as long as you identify something as verification and monitoring and that you do it. And so, like some of these things that you kind of lay out, that are being laid out, will be added in the book. And I think it helps us as instructors when we have to go through and talk about it. We don't get caught up in some of the weeds. So some of that stuff is, we've done a better job in going through and explaining. So as I mentioned, right now, we've got a good portion of the hard lifting done. Like right now, we're working on the hazard analysis section, which is probably one of the bigger sections that's going to get adapted. And then the other section will be the supply chain chapter. But a lot of the other chapters are pretty, should not be a lot of difficulty. So, as Donna was mentioning earlier, kind of our goal is really kind of finishing this up by we're kind of looking at the next annual meeting to have it done, and then rolling it out between that and 2023. So that's our goal. I think we're going to be on top of it. I don't think there's, we're really kind of in a groove now in terms of doing this, and so it's going on. But that's the PowerPoints are just one part of it. The PowerPoints in the book. Then it comes down to a lot of other things that have to go in there, and so. One of the things that we mentioned with Bob Brackett kind of stepping out, we've kind of fallen behind in terms of having a person in there to make decisions with regard to, we need to have, some pictures taken. We need to have, some of these other things that have to get done. And unfortunately, we've fallen a little behind on that, or that's part of the Fspca that, that has to kind of get back involved with it when somebody can come in and make decisions that need to be made from that perspective. And that's that for that. I guess we have some time for some questions, so feel free to ask. And also, as anything, because we're all extension people, we're always available, via email. So if you do have any questions later on, you're like, I wonder what they're going to do about that. Feel free to send me an email. Always happy to answer those. And of course, like all of you, I think all of us are always willing to provide support to anybody who needs it. So if there is anything that we can do for anybody, at any time, please, we're here. So just send an email or give us a call.
So there are a few questions in the chat. Amanda asked if this new training would be sufficient for HACCP training as well, because it's incorporating those two aspects into one.
Yeah, and that's our goal.
And then just a supplemental question after that from Dave Seddon. Will the course length increase? And if so, how significantly?
No, that was one of the goals, that one of the things that we're working against is having any increase in time. So a couple things that we've done. One, reducing the redundancy that in the course, by getting rid of some crap from chapter 1 and making that a little bit easier. Combining in some of the resource chapter, because we covered resources a couple times, so that's reduced. So the goal is we're going to have the same number of chapters. It should not take any longer in terms of coverage within class.
Another question asked if anyone would have to do a supplemental training if they're already trained under the normal PCQI training, or if that is something that, because it's not going to be offered.
As Donna mentioned earlier, one of the things they're going to have is they're going to have that requirement for somebody to go through. They're going to try to make it a minimal cost for that person. But one of the things, we find, and Donna had put those numbers up earlier, there's a lot of instructors out there. And so one of the things is, by having these requirements in there to go back through, do some training, have some, have some cost to that. We can reduce the amount of instructors that are out there that call themselves instructors, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Right. So another question asked about the transition period of all of this. I know you mentioned fall of 2022 was the drop date, hopefully.
Yeah, it's not. It's and trust me, the transition will be made so that it's convenient for everybody. I don't think it's going to be like all of a sudden we're going to have, if you guys have done ServSafe training, that's how it always worked, right? All of a sudden you buy a bunch of ServSafe books and they come out, we got a new curriculum, right? And then you're trying to get rid of these stupid ServSafe books, right? We're going to try to really work hard and make sure that that's announced, because I'm sitting on a bunch of books now. I'm not like Donna. I go through and I order them through, like we order the mass load through through the Preventive Controls Alliance, and so they kind of show up, and so I don't want to be sitting on like a zillion books. So we'll try to make sure that, and I've got our group is one group that's going to take a loss if it's not done correctly.
So going back to my original question at the very beginning, will the certificate state HACCP and PC, or will it just state PC?
It'll just state PC, but the hope is, the goal is, again, for the third-party audit GFSI providers to accept that as a, and it's a HACCP-based training, right? So that's the goal.
Donna has a question. She's raising her hand. Go ahead, Donna.
Yes. So
shout out, Donna.
Have you considered going to International HACCP Alliance and trying to get it approved through them to give that certificate or seal with this course?
I don't think that is going to fly. I don't think they want to do that, because I just don't think. I mean, I wouldn't. If I was, as part of the executive board, I just think that is, that's just, I think it's no. I think they just rather have it approved through the thing. That's a good question, though. It's a good question.
Oh, because I know in the beginning there were some people who claimed you could take one course and they would give you both certificates, but you'd have to submit it to IHA.
You'd have to see, yeah, and that would be, yeah.
Okay.
Another question asked if the FSPCA is considering allowing like a chapter by chapter instruction of this course online, like spreading out the content, like one chapter per day over several weeks to kind of accommodate the small processors that don't have a lot of staff. And
you can certainly, there's nothing that stops you from submitting that through, as long as the class is 20 hours, and you meet all the criteria associated with that, that could be done, and you just would have to submit that through the write-up when you submit your course.
Right. That's allowed now. You can submit,
because a lot of universities do that. Right.
That we teach it over a semester. So as long as all the material is covered and the minimum time is there, you can break it up now.
And Dave said and had a few questions. One of them was, will the FSPCA address the definition by the FDA where a person doesn't need to take this course to qualify?
In terms of the qualification part of that, that is something, I think we're going to probably we will talk about that. We've not gotten to that yet. That's going to be part of that, the one chapter with involved with training. And I think there was a lot of discussion in and around that. So my guess is the fact that we will cover that, in that section to a greater degree than is covered currently.
And Dave had another question as well. He just asked if there is regulation to support the course, or if it's more of a move to add HACCP in to support the GFSI requirements. I mean,
that's just part of it. And I'll be honest with you, that is like one of my things. That's like, and so I talk a lot about that, but certainly a lot of this is going to be updating it to meet, the regulatory guidances that have been offered. Certainly one of the big sections that's being added, and Kathy Gomes and Claudia Coles are currently working on the hazard analysis chapter, really to integrate in the guidance document for that. And so that when you go through and do that, you're covering, that guidance document to a larger degree. So there's, like everybody, there's a lot of aspects that are, that are being addressed within this update. And that's why the update really has been a little bit more time consuming, and it really requires a whole, for the most part, a major change within the curriculum. So, but certainly, meeting, discussing some of those regulatory changes, updating the information as far as, reportable food registry information and stuff like that is certainly another important part of that. So
just for clarification, someone would have to take this course and a HACCP course supplementary to this one in order to gain both of those certifications for
that
an
is
audit.
Currently the way it is. Yeah, and a lot of that, it's not to say that somebody sitting through this course doesn't know HACCP, right? I mean, certainly it's broken down a little weird, but somebody who sits through this is going to get HACCP-based training. And unfortunately, what's happened is the fact that the third-party audit group, GFSI, which has a large portion of it, which of course works internationally, right? So they want to make sure that somebody goes through this gets that HACCP-based training. And so, our goal really is just to make sure that they come through and they give it the blessing and and say, hey, this is fine, this works. So.
All right, I think I covered everything in the chat, but Lori's raising her hand. So go ahead, Lori.
Martin, I mean, I just have a little concern, and that this is all right for the big companies who want or need GFSI, but there are a lot of companies who don't, and I'm a little concerned that integrating HACCP in the way that you're talking about will get confusing to some of them.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on that. Again, it's not like we're changing, all we're doing is rearranging what's covered within the book currently with regard to this, right? So, we talk about process preventive controls, and all we're doing is introducing process preventive controls as the 7 principles of HACCP, right? It's what's based in, it's what this training is based on, and we're just trying to really kind of highlight that a little bit more. So it's really kind of highlighting it versus changing it. We're not changing the material more or less. We're just rearranging it to highlight that. So when they go through and they're going to learn about process preventive controls, you're going to go through it like you would, more similar to like we would do in a HACCP class, which is go through the 7 principles. And that's really the main, the main change. Although I like to think of it more just as a rearrangement of the material, because we just moved a couple things back, from the chapters on verification and record keeping. From my perspective, I think it's important, when we look at process preventive controls or we look at CCPs, for the most part, these are, this is the main focus of a food safety program within a company. And I think it's important for somebody going through through PC training to come out and say, hey, that process is important, and I have to make sure I got all the aspects of my process preventive controls or my CCPs in place, because again, it's controlling some significant food safety hazards by the process.
All right, we're actually out of time. It just transitioned to 2. So we're actually right on time. So the next presenters can come up. I know Annie has the introductions for that. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you so much, Christina. And Donna, Martin, thank you both.
Hey, thank you so much for having us today. We appreciate it.